some reason my brain rejects the idea of it being Coltrane and not Bryant. I don't know what my problem is. So I've only lived in Edmond for 3 years, so I'll get the street names right one of these days. So we are in this series where we're talking about the specific location where we find ourselves. And the question becomes, what are we doing here? If a church exists here in this place at this time, is it just because like this was the real estate that was available, which sure, possibly, but is it also like, well, if we are here, what's the benefit of us being here? Not just to us, what's the benefit to the community? In what ways does us being here change the nature of what we do as a church versus if we were somewhere else, on some other corner in some other town? And so these are the questions we've been asking as we've been going through this series, and we've talked about how we as a church and as individuals can participate in what is happening in this place and at this time as a way to bring some amount of grace and peace and hope and life into the world around us. And so what we're trying to do is ask, like, from this location, is it possible that there are things that we can do? There are ways that we can bring more goodness and love and grace and peace and mercy into the world from this place than we could from some other place. And I'm really sorry. I feel like there's a lot of echo on. Is this distracting? Am I like Madison Square Garden, like big sounding right now, or am I just not hearing right? Getting a lot of blank looks. So we'll just go forward and pretend like it's fine. I used to preach with no microphone at all, and this is why. And so anyway, so what we're talking about with this series is what can we do in this place and at this time? And here, a reality that we haven't really confronted directly yet in this series is that it is very possible and very easy to drift into a state of hopeless passivity. I know it well. And what I mean by that is it is possible to become convinced that there is no good reason to spend our time or our collective time, or our individual time, or our collective time, or our energy, or our resources, or whatever, trying to bring some amount of goodness and hope and grace and peace into this place, because there's too much working against us. And I'm sure and depending on like where you come from, what your history is, what your original sort of like ideas of what church or community or whatever could be, it's possible that you've reached a place where you're just like, I just really hope they're not harming people. You know what I mean? Like the bare minimum is let's just make sure we're not actually making things worse. And so it's possible for us to sort of get to this place of like, I don't know. I don't know exactly how much good we can do by gathering together on a Sunday morning or doing various community activities or whatever. Like exactly how much progress can we possibly make from this place at this time? And so it's possibly become so beaten down or exhausted that any amount of effort made towards making the Well or any church the kind of place that we all hope it can be seems like a lot of wasted time and energy. And I mean, and I've talked about this a little bit before, but I do not currently work full-time as a pastor. I did before I came here, but that broke me. And so now I work at a bank and I do this for fun. And so this is, and one of the things about that is when we moved up here, and I talked about this before, but one of the conversations that we had in our house was, you know, are we going to find a church? What kind of church should we even be looking for? And my default response, and I've said this before, but my response was like, I don't think we're going to find a place that we all like, because what I was thinking was, I don't really want to go anywhere, because like what good could it possibly do? I worked in churches for over 20 years, and like it kind of just drained me in all sorts of ways. So I'm not sure I want to go back to attending a church. And thank goodness we found the Well as quickly as we did. And it is, the future version of the story is like, I do feel a renewed sense of hope and optimism about this. But it took me a little while to get there. When we first got here, I thought like, I just really hope like people are nice. You know what I mean? Like the bar is quite low at this point for what I was expecting. And so it's possible to get to that point. And I would venture to guess, I'm not the only one in the room who could tell you that. I would imagine some of us have come from a place of like, yeah, it was this church or no church, because like we have had so many negative experiences, and we've seen so much destruction and damage done inside the confines of spaces like this. Like, what in the world are we even doing here? Like, is this really a useful use of our time? And so it can, to pour ourselves into a place like this can feel like wasted energy. It can feel like a hopeless pursuit. And so I did want to spend some time kind of talking about that impulse and that feeling, because it's totally relatable, it's totally understandable. It's not crazy to think that, because I would imagine we've all had experiences that would inform us in a way towards we would be like, yeah, I guess it does sort of feel like that. A couple of years ago, my family and I, we were given an amazing opportunity. There was a conference for people in my profession to go to Hawaii. I'm not talking about pastors, I'm talking about bankers. Pastors don't get to go to Hawaii. Unless they were born there, they don't get to go there. But as a banker, now I get to go to these cool conferences, and one of them happened to be in Hawaii. And so we decided we're just going to take the whole family since we have this opportunity. So we took all 3 kids, and we went to Hawaii. And on day 1, we ate a really good meal, and on day 2, my daughter and I got really sick from the meal that we ate on day 1. And so I missed a good chunk of that conference I was paid to go to from being really, really sick. And so I remember we were in our hotel room, and Caroline and the boys were out swimming or doing whatever, and Delia, my daughter, and I, she was 10 at the time, she was laying in one bed in the hotel room, and I was laying in the other, and we just had Bluey on in the background because we couldn't just only listen to the sound of each other being sick. And so we were laying, both of us like looking up at the ceiling, and Delia, my 10-year-old, said, "We flew all this way and we got sick." And I said, "I know." And she said, "You know, the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze." From the mouths of babes. So this is one of her favorite phrases because my dad really likes that phrase. He says it about everything. Like anytime we're about to like come up with a decision, like should we do this or should we not? My dad is always like, I don't know, is the juice worth the squeeze? So my daughter has absorbed, that's the one thing she's learned from my dad. And so this is a phrase we now use with a lot of frequency in our house. And I always return to that moment of like, yeah, she really nailed it on that. The juice was not worth the squeeze. And so in other words, basically the question is like, is the effort worth the result? Is the question being asked with, is the juice worth the squeeze? In other words, is pouring out any amount of time, energy, whatever, to serve and give our time anywhere worth it? And so what we're asking with this, the reason I told you that whole story, the reason what we're talking about today is when we serve, when we give, when we pour energy, time, effort into this place, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is there any amount of return on that, or are we just kind of, are we doing a lot of work to get nowhere, basically? And so to sort of explore this idea, I wanted to look at a story from the book of 2 Samuel. So 2 Samuel it's a book in what we refer to as the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and there are several stories in the book of 2 Samuel about the second king of Israel, a guy named David. He's well known, you've heard about him probably. And so David, there are several stories about David that sort of inform a lot of what became tradition later. And so a thing that's going on in 2 Samuel is, okay, so it's kind of a weird kind of framing device. So David, at the time that this story is being told, David is older and he's about to die. And so the writer, as David is approaching death, the writer begins to tell stories from David's younger days. And he says, like, as we reflect and look back on the life of this king, what are the stories that sort of define how we see him and our understanding of him? And so as the writer tells these stories to honor the great things that David did, one of the stories is the one we're going to look at. So the following is one of the stories that the writer chooses to include. So in 2 Samuel 23, beginning verse 13, it says, "During the harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem." So there's this huge detail. So basically, you have David in a stronghold, and you have his enemies in a specific place. And the detail about where they are is actually really important. The detail about where his enemies are. His enemies are in a place called Bethlehem. You've heard of it, because Bethlehem is where David was born. And David is in a cave somewhere else, and his enemies are in his hometown. So this is an important detail that the writer is giving us. And then in verse 15, it says, "David longed for water and said, 'Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem.'" So the question then we have to ask is it simply that David is thirsty and the well near Bethlehem just has really good water? Is it the most practical source of water? Or is there something else going on here? Because we tend to sort of read the story and take everything literally and not ask, like, is David actually asking for something else when he asks for the water from the well near Bethlehem? So the thing about this is Bethlehem is 12 miles away from where David is. So which, by the way, is a long way off at this time, before automobiles and things like that. So surely there is a source of water between here and 12 miles from here. So why is David saying, oh, I just wish I had some water from the well near Bethlehem? So surely there's a source of water closer, and actually it turns out there are several. Geographically, it's easy to find them. And so the point, though, is not the water. And this is what we sort of see, is that when David says, I'm longing for the water near Bethlehem, he's not saying, like, I just really wish I had that exact water. He's actually tapping into something else. The point is that David is longing for home. And he's recognizing that his enemies are in a place that he once called home, and it's creating a bit of an ache in him. And so it's a question of nostalgia a little bit. Have you ever just wanted to go back to a specific place or a time just to reconnect with your roots? Like I grew up in Hinton, which is a town about 60 miles from here, and I had to go back to Hinton just earlier this week for a funeral, and I didn't just go to where the funeral was. I drove through the whole town because it's been a long time since I've been there, and I just wanted to see, like, how are things. They're very similar to the way they were when I left, as is the nature with a lot of small towns. And so there's this thing about, like, I'm going into town and I'm noticing all the things that are the same. I'm noticing the things that are different, and it's kind of taking. It's almost like going into a time machine. And David is sort of aching for that bit of an experience. He's in a difficult adversarial spot, and the one place he can't go is the place he longs for the most, which is home. And so he has an ache, and it actually has very little to do with water. But sometimes it's possible that you will say something and someone else will hear you and take what you said a little bit too literally. And so that is, like, it's not just us who read this and are like, oh, we think David literally wants this. There are actually other people within earshot of David who think the same thing. So in verse 16, it says, so the three mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines. And the thing that's not said, that's implied, is they traveled 12 miles to do this. They broke through Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. This is a massive undertaking. This is 12 miles each way, plus whatever amount of effort that was taken to break through enemy lines to get there and back, just to bring a little bit of water back to David, because he said, oh, how I wish I had some water from the well near Bethlehem. So then at the end of verse 16, it says, but he, David, refused to drink it. He poured it out before the Lord. Far be it from me, Lord, to do this. He said, is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives? And David would not drink it. So to us, this seems bananas. Does it not? Like, these guys, so David says, I wish I had some water from Bethlehem. So these guys, like, not at all afraid of death, say, okay, guy wants water from Bethlehem, we're going to get him water from Bethlehem. So they go 12 miles, go through enemy lines, get the water, go back across enemy lines, travel the 12 miles again, deliver him the water, and David's like, I can't drink this, and he pours it out. Like, can you imagine being one of those three guys? Like, well, I'm sorry, what? No, you are drinking the water, sir. Like, have you ever made a meal for your kid? And they wouldn't eat it, and you're like, you were eating the food. Like, we will sit here until one of us dies, but you were eating the food. So imagine going through all this effort and then just having David be like, I'm pouring this out. Like, oh, good. I was really hoping that's what he would do with it. Like, so not only does he refuse to drink the water, he pours it like nobody else can drink the water either. And as it turns, so again, to us, from a 21st century vantage point, this looks absolutely bonkers. But at the time, to the people hearing and reading the story and to the people experiencing this in real time, this would have actually had some amount of significance, which takes us back to the book of Genesis 28. I realize you guys are already there, but we're going to go and look at it anyway. So you have this guy named Jacob. And this is a critical, like, we could do a whole series just on this one story. So Jacob in Genesis 28 has a dream. He's been on the run, he's in the middle of nowhere, and he has a dream. And he wakes up with a heightened awareness that God has been with him, even when he... Actually, the text in the quote is, surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware of it. And so this is, again, there are literally books written about that one sentence. And so there is just all this like new awareness going on with Jacob. Jacob has gone to sleep in a place that is not a specifically designated holy place. He wakes up, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't aware of it. It's this massive moment of awakening. So in Genesis 28:20, it says, then, at this same time, Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me the food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So this actually is where you sort of see the beginnings of what we often refer to as tithing, which is taking what you have and like slicing off 1/10 of it. And there are other, like, this became sort of a practical way of like funding the temple. And it has its roots in ancient Jewish tradition beginning right here. And so Jacob has this moment of awakening and awareness that God is with him. And the first thing he does is he makes a verbal pledge that for everything that he receives, he will somehow return a portion of it, a percentage of it to God. Which is basically what Jacob is doing is he's acknowledging all of life as a gift. He's saying everything I have in my possession is a gift from God. So as an acknowledgement of that, I will take some of it and I will somehow like surrender part of it so that I am acknowledging that all of it was a gift. So fast forward then 14 years, and Jacob returns to the same place. In Genesis 35, verse 14, it says this. It says, Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God had talked with him, and he poured out a drink offering on it. And he also poured oil on it. So part of Jacob's commemoration of this memory is he pours out what's known as a drink offering. So this initiates something that would later be practiced in Jewish culture for thousands and thousands of years after this, the drink offering. You can find lots of literature about this specific kind of sacrifice. So the drink offering is always done with an awareness of this story, of the Genesis 28 story, because it's about a guy who literally wakes up and realizes God is with me. God has been with me the whole time. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. So the idea here is you are so grateful for what you have received that you take part of it, and then you pour it out as a symbolic way of saying, I am aware that all of it is a gift. So as an acknowledgement of all of it is a gift, I will choose to intentionally not consume part of it to commemorate the generosity of the gift. So back to the story in 2 Samuel. When David pours out the water, he's not being wasteful. That's not what he's trying to do. He's not trying to be wasteful. He's acknowledging this water represents an act of sacrifice. It represents an act of generosity, of devotion, of like self-risk. And David is basically saying, I'm not worthy to receive this. He's not taking it for granted and he's not wasting it. He's acknowledging this is way too holy for me to simply just consume and go about my day. It's not an act of waste, it's an act of gratitude. So the sacrifice itself makes it sacred. The water was a gift, but when David pours it out, the water becomes sacred. So David says these men did something so sacred and sacrificial that simply drinking it would be to devalue it. So he pours it out because he realizes it's holy. It is a sacred event that has occurred, and I'm acknowledging it. So when you have received a gift, there is an opportunity to ask the question, is there a way to take this gift and pour some of it out? Not because I don't need it or not because I don't want it, but because I'm acknowledging the whole thing as a gift. And to consume all of it would almost be to take it for granted. So whenever you have something of value, time, money, resources, connections, whatever it is that you have, and then you pour some of it out, you are acknowledging that the whole thing was a gift, and you are expressing your gratitude for that gift. Take a look at Mark chapter 14. In Mark 14, beginning in verse 3, this is a story about Jesus. It says, while he, Jesus, was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. And we've talked about this story recently. She brought the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor, which is a fair point. And they rebuked her harshly. Then Jesus responds, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. So what is she doing? She's taking something valuable. Then other people who are watching this respond, why this waste? She could have used this for something practical. She could have put this to better use. And Jesus looks at the exact same act and says, no, this wasn't waste. It's beautiful. It's sacred. Jesus sees this for what it is, the pouring out of a gift to acknowledging that we are in the middle of a sacred event. And she does it to acknowledge something else that is sacred in her midst. She was acknowledging and participating in something that is divine and holy, that is occurring right in her midst. The waste is what makes it sacred. And this is what Jesus is trying to say. It's not that the people who are criticizing her don't have a point. It's that Jesus is saying, no. There's something else going on here. This isn't just about the thing and how can we most practically use the thing. This is about how do we acknowledge that we have something of value and acknowledge that this is actually a sacred way to acknowledge that the whole thing was a gift. How many of us, and I realize there are more complications, I'm going to oversimplify, but how many of us have ever been told, listen, if you're at an intersection and somebody's holding up a sign asking for money, don't give them money because, why? Because they're going to use it for something bad. They're going to use it for drugs or booze or whatever. And that's what most of us probably have been told as sort of a way to say, like, just do not engage. Right? And by the way, this is not a call to just go and empty your wallet to the next person you see, like with a sign, but it is a challenge to ask ourselves, why do we mentally respond to certain things in the way that we do? You know what I mean? Like, why do I see someone asking for something and my first response is to be suspicious? Like, and again, not that there aren't people who are looking to take advantage of other people. That is, listen, I work in banking. We see fraud all the time. You probably had your debit card or your social security number stolen at some point. And my response to that would not be, well, the whole thing was a gift. Just pour the whole thing out. You know what I mean? Like, no, shut the card down and change your information. But at the same time, it is a question of why am I naturally suspicious when somebody articulates a need? You know, and is my responding to that need bad if they don't do with it in the thing that I wanted them to do with it? Does that make sense? So when I do something out of an attempt to be generous, the most important question is not necessarily, are you going to be responsible with that? Or how are you going to use that? Are you sure you really are going to use that right? The point is not always where it goes. Sometimes it is. But the point isn't always is this going to get used in the way that I want it to be used? The point is, am I willing to pour something out? The point is, am I holding so tightly to the things that I have that even when I pour some of it out, there are strings attached? Or do I acknowledge, there are certain things that are a gift, and just letting go of control over the thing is acknowledging that it was a gift all along. So the act of receiving isn't always the point. Sometimes the act of giving something away is the point. The act itself is sacred, regardless of what happens to it after you've let it go. A little bit of a disclaimer, it usually is a good idea to be normally aware of what you are giving your money to. Again, I work at a bank. People get scammed every day because they were told they were giving money to something meaningful when they really weren't. That is a common thing that happens. So in this day and age, it's not a bad idea to ask a couple of questions, usually. But what I am saying, though, is lots of times we want to be generous, but we also want to retain some amount of control over the thing that we've given. And so sometimes it's because I'm looking for a reason to not pour something out that I begin to sort of probe and ask those kinds of questions. But when we pour out something from a place of gratitude and an awareness of the sacredness of all things, the point is that we took the time to recognize the gift and then just to release the thing that was a gift. I will, speaking from experience, lots of people have what are often behind closed doors referred to as the money people. And what I mean by that is there are certain people in lots of churches, not every church, but lots of churches there are certain people who can kind of get away with murder because they're the ones who are mostly paying the bills with their giving. And so everything is going great until the money person wants control over something that is actually not good for the church. For example, I will give you an example. This is an over-the-top example, but just to sort of get us all on the same page. This is not a real thing that I've seen. I've seen something very similar to this, but not this. So let's say you have someone who's been giving lots and lots and lots of money that's basically been paying for most of the staff salaries and the electric bill and whatever. And then that person's mother dies. And then that person comes to the church elders or whoever and says, listen, my mother never came to this church, but she was very important to me. And so I think we should hang her portrait in the sanctuary area near the cross, and just so we can remember, her sacrifice, which led to me being here. And you're sitting there thinking, I'm not sure I want this guy's mother, who I've never met, to just be staring at us for the rest of time just because he happens to be a generous giver. And so the question then becomes, do we hang this guy's mom's picture on the wall, or do we say no and risk him leaving and taking his generous donations with him? And this is a real question that, like I said, I've never seen a plaque with the person's name on it. I have seen, but the portrait's a little over the top. But anyway, it all sort of speaks to the same thing of I'm being generous, but also I'm going to call that in at some point, and you're going to owe me. And so it's not a gift. It's not pouring it out if I go asking for some sort of return on the thing that I poured out. So in that situation, the portrait situation, if the guy says, listen, if you don't hang my mom's portrait, I'm out of here. Well, the money, the giving, the generosity, that was never a gift in the first place. It was a transaction in which the person believed they were buying a certain amount of power and control. And when they learned they weren't, then the church became less useful to them. So there are ways to participate and to give and I'm talking about giving because it's a more tactile, but really any sort of participation, any sort of time, any sort of interaction, any sort of thing that you do to pour yourself into this place, it can become transactional, and it can become, well, I'm doing all of this, what am I getting out of it? Is the juice worth the squeeze, if you will? And so in that situation, well, it was never really a gift. It was never really poured out at all. It was basically a deposit made in exchange for something in the future. And so what David and Jesus are showing us in these different stories is that once something has been poured out, it has been poured out. You can't control it anymore. That's why you pour it out. The surrendering of the gift and the power that comes with it is what makes it sacred. The fact that I'm willing to just loosen my grip on these things and allow someone else to benefit from them, that is what makes it sacred. There's another story in the book of Luke, chapter 19. I'm pretty sure Ashley's talked about this recently too, so sorry I'm just retreading all this old ground. But so in Luke chapter 19, there's a very famous story about a guy named Zacchaeus. And if you grew up in certain traditions, you know one exact thing about Zacchaeus, which is that he is short, which is unfair for several reasons, but it's possible because all it says is he wasn't tall enough to see Jesus passing by. It's possible. I've been to concerts where the guy in front of me is way too tall. I feel like that shouldn't define me for thousands of years. But that's how it is for Zacchaeus. This poor guy, this has become the one defining trait of his whole life. And so Zacchaeus is a tax collector, which probably is a much more important detail than whatever height he was standing at the moment. But so Zacchaeus is a tax collector, which means Zacchaeus has profited off of the suffering and the poverty of his friends and neighbors. Tax collectors at this time and in this place, not a super popular group. Probably not a very popular group today. Not a popular group then either. So you have, apologies to all my IRS employee friends here. So so Zacchaeus encounters Jesus. And so in Luke chapter 19, verse 8, it says, "But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord," to Jesus, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." This is a fascinating story because Zacchaeus has an encounter. He meets Jesus face to face. He has a direct encounter. And Zacchaeus' first action in the aftermath of this is to say, I'm going to start giving stuff away. I'm going to be a more generous person. And Jesus does not respond by saying, great idea. What does he say? He says, today salvation has come to this house. It is very rare for Jesus to encounter a situation and to say, today salvation has come. That almost never happens. But he says it here. And in what way? Why? Not because Zacchaeus prayed like a specific prayer that someone told him to pray, not because he was baptized, not because he joined a specific group that declared it that way. Zacchaeus says, I'm going to be a generous person. And Jesus says, I see. You dialed into something. You are in this with us. Generosity has somehow unlocked something in you. So when a person encounters Jesus face to face, it often results in that person asking new questions about how to be more generous and focused on the needs of other people. That is fascinating. To other tax collectors who have been gaining wealth, this might have looked like a waste. For Zacchaeus to be like, I'm going to start giving stuff away. But to Jesus, it's a beautiful sacrifice. For Jesus, it's not a waste. For Jesus, it is, oh, salvation has come to this place. So there is this thing inside of us that very naturally wants to see some kind of return. If I'm going to do something for somebody, I need it to have some kind of result. If I'm going to spend time volunteering here, if I'm going to be doing anything to better this space, I sure hope it works out, which obviously we do hope it works out. But is the point, well, I'm going to do it because it will result in this thing, and if it doesn't result in this thing, then I shouldn't have done it in the first place. And I think what Jesus is showing is like, no. The thing that makes it sacred isn't always how it, like the final result. The thing that makes it sacred is that you did it at all. The thing that makes it sacred is that you spent time and energy and resources making this place more of what you believed it could be, regardless of how much juice you get out of the squeeze. You know what I mean? So I am sure there are those of us in this room who have spent hours and hours and hours in classrooms with kids, or making coffee on Sunday morning, or getting here early to make sure everything is orderly and clean so that when people come in, it looks good, it looks okay. And it's possible that if you've done that enough times that you've thought, like, what in the world? I feel like I'm just pushing the same boulder up the same hill over and over and over again. Nobody even knows that I'm doing this most of the time. And I think Jesus would say, like, the point isn't, like, did anybody see? The point is, did you pour it out? What is it because... Is it because you were looking for something, or is it because you recognize, oh, the whole thing, all of my time is a gift? So if I give some of it to make this space more of what we hope it can be, maybe just the act of doing that is what makes it sacred. A lot of times we want to be seen, we want to be acknowledged, which is a totally normal human kind of thing to want. But the point that Jesus is making here is like, no, it's the giving it away that makes it sacred. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the passage where Jesus says, if you give, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Basically, he's saying, like, yeah, because, like, if the whole thing is just for credit or show or pats on the back or whatever, then that's what you're going to get out of it, and that's basically going to be the only result. And so here, it's basically saying, yeah, maybe just doing this at all, participating in any sort of way, acting out of generosity at all, that is the thing that is sacred. And again, you can be generous with anything, with your time, with like introducing certain people to other people because they need to, like, maybe, I don't know, for example, like maybe you know somebody who needs a job and you introduce them to somebody who can maybe get them a job. Like, just making connections, that is a kind of pouring something out. And so a lot of times we go looking for, well, what am I getting out of it? Or what is the end result? And again, the question becomes like, well, that's not actually the most interesting question. The most interesting question is, were you willing to loosen your grip? Were you willing to pour it out in the first place? One of my all-time favorite things is Seinfeld. And I realize I've dated myself a lot because that show went off the air a long, long time ago. For those of you under 30, this was a TV show in the 90s. There were commercials and stuff. It was a different time. And so, anyway, there was a character on Seinfeld named George. George, no character in the history of television has ever gotten me as much as George gets me in terms of like how high-strung he tends to be most of the time. But there is an episode that I relate with so deeply, and he's been going to this restaurant that serves calzones, and he's been having to buy calzones for his boss every day, and he keeps getting dirty looks because he hasn't been leaving a tip. And so there's a tip jar on the counter. And so he pulls out $1 and is about to drop the tip in. And then the guy at the counter turns around and does not see George give the tip. And so, of course, George can't handle this. And so he reaches into the tip jar to pull the money back out, which, of course, is when the guy turns around and spots him and he's banned from the store. So, and hilarity ensues. So, a lot of us, like, again, I've never related to anybody as much as I did to George when he was like, should I or should I not reach back in? Just to drop the tip back in, not because I want to keep the tip, but because I want him to see me give the tip. It's very important that I be seen doing this. And I think this is such a human thing. The reason this show is so popular is because a lot of people, again, 30-ish years ago, when people were simpler, when we were watching Seinfeld as a society, we were able to watch the show and be like, oh yes, I recognize that impulse. I totally understand the mental track that would get you to, I'm going to reach back in there, I'm going to grab that tip just so I can drop it back in, because I don't want it to go unseen. Because the thing in that moment is, I need to be seen doing it, otherwise why did I even do it? But what Jesus is inviting us to is like, no, it's the letting go of the thing that makes it sacred. The thing that is sacred is not when someone notices. The sacredness is because you chose to give it away in the first place. So when you pour yourself into making the well more of what it is capable of becoming, that is a sacred thing. When you come up here during the week and help Miss D make that hallway look like a full-blown, like otherworldly experience, that was sacred, regardless of how many people actually walk through that hallway. When you spend any amount of time trying your best, doing anything to say, I believe in this place. I believe that this corner of Edmond has sacredness in it, and I want to be a part of that. Anytime we participate in that, it's a drink offering. We're pouring it out. It's not a waste, regardless of what the end result is. The act of doing it itself made it sacred. When you pour yourself into making something better, when you pour yourself into this community, the act of doing that was the thing that made it sacred. This could be about money, but it's so much bigger than that. I mean, to talk about it only in terms of money is to make it way, way too small. Because this is about your time. It's about your energy. It's about your enthusiasm. It's about your curiosity. It's about what do you hope to see, like, dwelling in this community. And when you give any of these things to bring life and energy into this place, it's a sacred gift. And no matter who notices or how much credit you received, it was sacred just because you chose to give it away. The act of pouring it out is what makes it sacred. So may we be the kinds of people who go looking for ways to pour something out, and hopefully that will result in more grace and peace and love existing in our community. But even if it doesn't, the act of pouring it out, that was what was sacred.